All right. Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing today? Awesome, awesome. Well, once again, it's an honor to be here. And once again, my name is Brandon Mack, pronouns he, him, his. And my words today are going to be centered around moving from an ally to an accomplice. So first off, I want to ask this wonderful gathering, both here in front of me, but also to all of our friends out in Zoom land, when you see me, what do you see? You all heard my amazing bio, but in this world, we don't wear our bios. We don't automatically know that about each other when we're walking around in the world. So instead, what do we have is the preconceived notions that come with just seeing our outside appearance. And some of us have been given the privilege of our outside appearance automatically conferring goodness and humanity purely because of the way that we look. But some of us, unfortunately, because of the ways in which society has been constructed, are not given that same sense of humanity and that same sense of goodness. So, for those, in case you don't know, I am a Black man. When you see me immediately, that is the first thing that you see. And unfortunately, here in the United States of America and also globally, Blackness has been perceived as a negative. So automatically, when I go out into the world, regardless of my credentials, regardless of the things that I have done in this world, the world automatically perceives me and those who look like me, who have darker skin, as automatically being negative. And therefore, my humanity, my life automatically gets devalued. Now, you may also see a gay man, but there's no one universal way for someone to be a member of the LGBTQ plus community because we are inherently a spectrum. But if you see a mannerism, if you see a moment that is off-centered from your perception of what masculinity and maleness is, you may right off think that I am a member of the LGBTQ plus community, and that could also confer a sense of inhumanity and a sense of lessness as well. So when I go out into the world, I always have to go out automatically with those two things being at the forefront of the ways in which the world perceives me. And the world would tell me that, one, those two things don't exist together, and that those things make me less of a person. I tell you, I have been bucking against those notions from the very beginning of my life. And that has been both as just being a human, but also from a religious standpoint. One of the things, and many of the things that you may not know by just seeing me, is that I am a 3-time cancer survivor, and I am currently living with cancer right now. I have thyroid cancer. But just because you know that should not necessarily confer that my life is now worth more or worth less. But it's just a fact that I live with. Another fact that you may not know is that I am a deacon's kid. I grew up in a small town called Lake Jackson, Texas, and went to a church in Freeport, Texas, a predominantly Black church, mostly Southern Baptist, and grew up a deacon's kid. My dad would love this right now because he never thought I would ever give a sermon in my life. But one of the things that the church, unfortunately, tried to reinforce is that my existence shouldn't exist. That by being Black, my LGBTQ-ness canceled out my Blackness. And that being Black doesn't align with being LGBTQ+. That I couldn't wholly be myself in any space. And so here is supposed to be a community and a place and a space that says, love thy neighbor. That says, love. But yet it's telling me you can't love yourself. Well, one of the ways that I kind of bucked against that is when I came out to my church. So my family knew who I was, and I had a private conversation about them with that, and they did not fully accept that at the beginning. So one Sunday, I came home for Easter Sunday's service in a wonderfully fitted suit, by the way. And my father told me he wanted me to change out of those clothes before we went to church because he felt that wearing a fitted suit did not align with his conception of what a man should be, and that it would be announcing and too much for the church that I was going to. I was steadfast that I was not going to do that because I wanted to be my full and authentic self. My stepmom and my sister pleaded with me to change clothes. They were like, Brandon, there's no need for this. This is just holding things up. Please change. And so I thought for a moment, do I yield or do I keep challenging? So for the sake of peace, I yielded and I changed into a big billowy suit that my dad had picked for me. Now at that time, I thought about that and I thought about how so many of us yield to change to fit ourselves into a box and how we discount ourselves. Is that really what we should be doing in a place, in a space that preaches acceptance or preaches love? But for the sake of peace, I decided I'll yield this one time. So I went to church and made it all the way through to the benediction. When it gets to the benediction, my stepmom and my dad went to the back to the finance room. And the minister gets up and he says, I want to send a special shout out to all of our college students. I don't want to name any names because I don't want you to think that pastor forgot about you, but Brother Mack. I'm like, oh, okay, this will be fun. Hey, Reverend, how you doing? We ain't seen you in a while. Yeah, been busy with school, things of that nature. And then he says, I heard you're getting married. Now, if you've ever been in a Black Baptist church, you know that immediately preceding him saying that was a whole bunch of whoos and things of that nature. I said the following, and I quote, no, I'm not getting married. It's not legal in this state yet. And for those of you who don't know what I mean, you'll understand by the time you get home. Needless to say, they understood what I meant. So by the time I got out of the church, my dad had came from the finance room to the front of the church, and he was like, why did you do that? And I had to let him know, while I may change my clothes, I'm not going to change who I am. Because that is not what this church says that it's about. This is supposed to be about truth. This is supposed to be about love. And I may change my clothes to suit you, but one thing I'm not going to do is lie about who I am for the purposes of you. I share that because, once again, it fundamentally goes back to what I think this church believes in and what we all should believe in, and that we should be our full, unapologetic selves in every place and space that we are in. And when we foster that, we get to the place and space we want to be as a society. So, to a certain extent, that was one of my first forms of activism, was just being me. And I do feel that that is a form of activism that we all can engage in, is in being our full, unapologetically beautiful selves. Because when you do that, you help give permission to other people to know that they too can be their full, unapologetic selves. Now, it's not like we need permission, but sometimes we just need to see that example to free ourselves to then go and be our full and unapologetic selves. So I definitely encourage every single one of us, because my existence does not preclude you from your existence. Me and my Blackness does not stop you from being you. Me and my LGBTQ plusness doesn't stop you from being you. But unfortunately, we live in a world where unfortunately people believe that somehow our existence is dangerous. There's a reason for why we have disproportionate incidences of police brutality that is aimed at Black and LGBTQ plus people. And it goes back to the fact that we in this country specifically have a devaluation problem. We devalue each other. We have inherently devalued Black people from the inception of this country. The fact that the Constitution did not confer humanity to all of us demonstrates that we have fundamentally had a devaluation problem. Black people in this country started as property. Then we became 3/5 of a human. And that wasn't for our purposes. That was for the purposes of those who enslaved us. And then we became humanity. But even in the struggle of becoming humanity, we still haven't been conferred equal rights. The fact that we don't have the ability to even vote the same way as other people, because voter suppression is still happening today. The fact that we can't own property and the hoops that it takes to own businesses and to have access to that quote unquote American dream shows that we have a devaluation problem. But the fact that an institution that was created for the purposes of returning enslaved human beings back to the condition of their enslavement, and that institution is policing, fundamentally started with looking at Black people as being property, suggests we have a problem today. It is that inherent belief and that inherent relationship that has led to where we are today when it comes to police brutality, in that fundamentally Black people have never been looked at as equal. And if institutions are not challenging that fact, challenging that relationship, is it any wonder why we see what we see today? And who's speaking up? We believe institutions are supposed to fix themselves, but we all live in this country. Has Congress ever really fixed itself? Has any of the other institutions really reformed themselves, or do they continue to do business as usual? So you could put on a training program. You can put on diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings. But where is the intentionality of that change? Where is the demonstration of that change? Because I'm still waiting to see it. And I know many of us are all still waiting to see it. Because we have got to address the devaluation of each of us to get to a place where we have the world that we want to see. And that requires intentional action. When it comes to LGBTQ plus people, we still see disproportionate incidences of murder related to people who are part of the LGBTQ plus community, but most clearly and explicitly, Black trans women. Many of you may not know that Texas is literally the murder capital of the world when it comes to the murder of trans people, specifically Black trans people. And why? What does anyone of the trans experience do besides exist and just want to live their lives like the rest of us? But just because they come from an experience that is different than yours does not give you, I, or anyone else any validation to devalue their lives. But yet it happens and it goes unreported. Lack of media attention, lack of even attention sometimes even in the LGBTQ plus community. Because once again, we have a devaluation of human life problem. So, the way that I tackle that is through activism. I have always found that my activism is a reflection of my spiritual calling. It comes from the fact that I want to fundamentally see a world where every one of us gets the opportunity and ability to do two fundamental things: to be and to breathe. That's all we want. To be able to really feel the possibilities of what life has to offer. To feel that just inherently I can be myself in any place and space. And if that is a place and space that won't have me, that's fine. I can go to somewhere else. I can create another place and space, and that is also inherently okay. But I should not be targeted because of who I am. And also, I just want to breathe. As we know, the breath is an extension of life. It is the central force of life, and we should all have access to that. But do you know what it feels like when you're stopped by a police officer and immediately you hold your breath? When you are just walking down the street and you see someone clutching their purse and you immediately have to hold your breath because they perceive you as being dangerous. And instantly they have a power over you because of the way that this society is constructed. That they could easily say, they're dangerous. And then the next thing you know, I'm dead because my life is automatically and inherently devalued. So my activism, from the things that I do for my day job, I'm formerly a college admission director and have been seeking to make the college admission process as equitable as possible, to my activism in Black Lives Matter, to my activism with the LGBTQ plus community and our caucus, to the research work that I do, is all under that fundamental principle of I just want all of us to be able to be and breathe. And that activism comes from a very spiritual place, in that we should all be ourselves in every single place and space. So as part of that, what I advocate for is that we move away from something called allyship to accompliship. Many of us have heard about the term ally. It's nice, right? You know, when we think of, unfortunately, war and things of that nature, you think of your allies. And generally, allies are going to be there in the fight because they're affiliated. But often what happens at the end of a war, allies go home. They don't maintain that connection. And the people who were centrally involved have to clean up that mess. The same thing is true for today's allyship. We have allies who will come to the protest, take the selfie, put it on social media, and say, look what a good thing I did today. Very performative. But when it comes to the end of that battle, when we've lost, when a family hasn't gotten justice for their child who has died at the hands of police brutality, when we see voter suppression laws being enacted, when we see trans kids being legislated against, where are our allies when that happens? Usually they've gone and left us, which is why I say the time for allyship is over. We need a deeper connection, a deeper relationship to where we're continuously together, even when we lose. You need to be that person who has the broom to help sweep up the mess, and then be there to say, hey, I'm still here. What can I do? What can we do collectively to win this fight so that we are all valued equally? Those, my friends, are our accomplices. Now, many people say, oh, Brandon, that's the wrong word to use. And I'm all like, oh, no, it's the right word to use. Because you have to think. When you think of an accomplice, usually it's in the criminal element, right? Baby, I've been looked at as a criminal all my life just for being Black. So hence, I need you to support me in the fact that they still think that I'm a criminal. But you in it for the long haul. So that's why I say it's the right word. But we can also use co-conspirator. We can also use any other word. But the thing is, it's a deeper connection. And in this deeper connection, it isn't just about showing up. It's about using our intentional actions to facilitate ultimately what do we want. Now, diversity, equity, inclusion, big buzzwords right now, right? Everyone says that, they do the workshops. But what people fail to realize is that diversity, equity, and inclusion are intentional actions. They don't just happen. You have to put in the work to facilitate diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I always tell people equity should be first, because you should never bring in diverse people into a situation that doesn't have equity. So when we think of equity, that is building in the infrastructure to where we all have buy-in and we all have the ability to equally participate as we are. One of the great things about this church when I was looking up your principles is that you believe in people coming in as their full authentic selves. That is an act of equity, of building in equity, of letting people know all of you can come into this space and you all have buy-in into this space. So that is a great thing when we tell people that very directly and very honestly and openly, that you are welcomed here, that you are valued here. So that builds in the equity. Diversity is the physical representation, right? The visual representation. And we want all different voices. So when we bring in diversity, it means that we want you here, but we're also going to value your voice. We're not just going to use you to put you on the nice little flyer, the nice little bulletin, just to say, oh, look how diverse we are. No, it is because you feel that equity that brought you in, and you're using your authentic experience to make this environment as diverse as possible. And then when it comes to inclusion, do you feel that sense of belonging? And are you doing things intentionally to make it so that everyone feels that sense of belonging? Seeing you all greet each other and taking that moment just to greet everyone, I love seeing that, because that's also a form of inclusion, of making it be like, oh, it's your first time in here? Hey, who are you? Happy that you're here. Thank you for being in this space. And then hearing from those who may not be in the majority, asking them directly, what do you need to feel included in this space? And not questioning them why they feel that way, but accepting that we need to do something to make it so that everyone feels that this is their place in this place. That is inclusion. So my friends, what I offer you today is that we have to move away from that allyship. If we want all of us to be in a place, in a space where we can all be and breathe, we have got to move away from merely being allies and being accomplices to all of us. Now, a couple of things that I want to share with you in terms of how we get there, because it can seem big. And a lot of people think, activism is one way, right? That you're out there protesting. That's one form. But there are so many different forms of activism. And one thing I hate is when people engage in activism checking, meaning that, oh, you have to do this, and that's the way that you're an activist. Oh, no. Your activism is your activism. It's what you do for the cause. And it is equally and valued, because it's going to take all of us in all of our own unique ways to dismantle these systems. So you got to play an active part. And that is a function of your spiritual calling, in believing that we all should have a place in the space. So a couple of ways that we do this is through acknowledging your privileges. White privilege is real. It is. When you go out into this world, if you are a white presenting person, you automatically get conferred that goodness, automatically get confirmed that innocence that those of us with darker skin tones don't get. So you have to acknowledge that. You may have educational privilege. You may have able-bodied privilege. financial privilege, any number of privileges. But acknowledging that does not mean it is a negative. It is acknowledging the reality of how our world is constructed and that you have it. You can use those privileges in service of your activism. One of the ways that I see it is when we go out and protest, we do have white individuals who are in the front because they know that the police officers, when they see them, they're more than likely not going to accost them in the same way that they would if they saw me coming. They also put their body where their privileges are because they know that can be the difference of me dying there or me getting home. They also practice something called stepping up and stepping back. Stepping up means you use your voice in the space when it is needed, but also stepping back to make sure that all voices are heard. Because once again, that privilege is real. So for our men, we have male privilege. For some unknown reason, they feel that our voices tend to get valued more. This means accepting that when we're talking too much, we may need to do this and allow different genders that are not male of center, women voices, non-binary voices, trans voices to speak up, to literally move the mic and say, you're going to listen and we're going to step back. The great Shirley Chisholm has a wonderful quote that reminds me of this, in which she said, when I went to the table and there wasn't a seat for me, I always brought a folding chair. Because that way you can make that space for yourself. So part of this is sometimes we got to make sure we bring a whole thing of folding chairs to make sure that all of our friends have a seat. And then if we don't like the table, push it over like the Real Housewives and we'll build up a new one. But we all have got to be a part of it. Unlearning. Unlearning, I think, is so important, especially with where we are right now, because if we think about the world and when it comes to K through 12 education, we're at a crossroads where people are misusing the teachings of other cultures and calling it something called critical race theory. I'm here to tell you definitively, critical race theory is not taught in K through 12 education. It isn't. What is being done is now finally we're starting to center the voices of marginalized people and learning from their experiences. And that is so critically important because when we learn about each other, it makes it so much harder for us to devalue one another. So that's why it's important for you to learn about James Baldwin and Essex Hemphill, who I read to you today. Two amazing Black gay men who were scholars, authors, and talked about the experience of being in this country. And learning from them both empowers those who are like them, but also educates about the experience of those who are not like them. So part of the learning process is also unlearning. So think about when you are encountering different people. If you have those preconceived notions, think about where did that notion come from? And is that true? Is it true that I should perceive someone who is darker as dangerous? Is it true that I should perceive someone who is of a lower socioeconomic background to be less than? Ask yourself where it came from, and then unlearn that and be open to new teachings. We have to normalize difficult conversations. We shouldn't be afraid of it, because in being uncomfortable is where the learning comes. In being challenging of your preconceived notions is where the learning comes. And sometimes it's got to be difficult. One of the things that many of us who are people of color don't get to do is opt out of difficult conversations. We don't get that choice. We don't get to pick up and walk away. You shouldn't pick up and walk away when you feel uncomfortable. Stay in it. Ask yourself, why do I feel uncomfortable? Wrestle with that. And think about how uncomfortable it has been for us sitting in classrooms, sitting in conversations where people are talking about us, but not directly to us. We've got to normalize that. Be in community with other communities. Once again, when we learn about each other, it makes it so much harder for us to devalue each other. And part of that is physically being in community with each other. So I invite you, go to different organizations, go to different community gatherings. Just say you're there because you want to be in community with other people. And in that, you learn so much about yourself, but also about them. And that also helps you to not devalue them. So definitely be in community. And once again, if you feel uncomfortable, trust me, it'll read. And more than likely, that community is going to try to do what y'all have done today, make people feel comfortable. But we got to be in community with one another. And then finally, let's focus on collective impact. Too often, we suffer from a case of mini-me's or me syndrome. What is it about me that makes it beneficial for me instead of what does it do to make it benefit for the collective? Because when we center and strive for the benefits of the most marginalized of us, we all benefit. So when you hear people say, I need you to speak up and speak out for me, and you are not like them, that is the way that you can move from merely being an ally to being an accomplice. And you can't sit on the sidelines. We need all of us here. So when reproductive justice comes up, I'm going to be there because it impacts people who I love. When immigration issues come up, I'm going to be there because it impacts people who I love and who I know. And so that's what we all have to collectively do, because it's going to take every single one of us, and no action is too small. That one action could change someone's mind who could save a life. So what I hope that you've learned from my wonderful story is this: be unapologetically who you are. We have one life, and that life should be lived beautifully and fully, just because we are who we are. But also, in order for us to get to the place and space where we can all be and breathe, we've all got to be in it together. So, my activism is a form of way I express my spiritual calling and my sense of self and my sense and belief that we should all live our lives abundantly. I invite every single one of you to join me on this journey in any way you can. Thank you so much.